This is a video response, or sort of a video on request, to a new and regular commenter on some of the videos that I make by the name of T Noon. And the question asked was, let's say, best practices for running Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars, for a single player. I thought that was kind of interesting. While I was living in Seoul, there was a period of time where, because of schedules and because of members of the core group, we had quite a big group, slowly packing up and going home. We dwindled down to where it was just one game master and one player. And playing that way has been an on again, off again part of my life as a gamer over these last 30-some years. And so I thought, well, okay, let's see what we can come up with to try and give some sort of beginning answer to the question. I imagine this will stick pretty close to conventional RPG wisdom, and I'll try to keep it focused on Star Wars in particular. But our group's experience with the game has been with 5 people and a game master, so we're getting a pretty full experience and full interaction with a lot of the rules and how the rules interact from character type to character type. We have played with as few as 2 players. I wasn't the game master then, I was the player. So let's give it a go. Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars, 1 GM, 1 player. The first place I would start would be with the personality mechanics: obligation, duty, morality. Which game you're playing is going to be important. Now, there are some obligations in Edge of the Empire, for example, which will push the character more toward avoidance of people, while there are some that are going to pull them into interactions with people. For my money, the universe can start to seem pretty empty without heavy interaction in the group of characters, and there's no group really, it's just the one person, and without heavy interaction with lots of NPCs. So if we end up with a bounty hunter character who's kind of a loner, whose only focus is on making money, then this game could, because there's only 1 player, run the risk of being pretty silent, pretty action-oriented, and just cycling through scene after scene, which may not be very engaging for all personality types. There are certainly some out there who would just really like that, churning through obstacles. It may not be very engaging for all game master types. So I guess I would lean more toward the initial discussion for Edge of the Empire being on obligations, which get that character in with groups, having to go from one group to another group to accomplish something, move stuff around, and always meeting people. Which leads me to the next aspect. Don't let the universe be empty. Be willing to have an NPC group, a tight, maybe small NPC group around that main character, so that they have someone to interact with. Okay? So that some of the prime benefits of group play, where players can spitball ideas, can trash talk each other and say that idea is stupid, we got to do this instead, having that be a possibility, which means as the game master you need to be willing to step away from your role of, let's say, semi-omniscience and into the role of a character, a trusted friend, an ally, a Spock to a Kirk, to mix genres, and give them a sounding board for their ideas and let them know that this sounding board is absolutely safe, right? They can have a conversation with this NPC and it's not going to come back and bite them in the end. So there's the core group of trusted NPC allies and the external group of the huge Star Wars galaxy that they can and should be interacting with. Yes, that's where I would start for Edge of the Empire. For Age of Rebellion, we have to look at duty. Duty in Age of Rebellion is definitely what the character is looking to do, much like with obligation, or of course with obligation it's more like having to do something. But duty is also going to be pushing them. The more duty that they acquire, the more, say, trust that the rebellion will have in them, the more difficult missions will be. Age of Rebellion is very much structured on mission-oriented play. Now, that mission might be long-term, like fomenting rebellion on a relatively peaceful planet, or building mistrust of the Empire in a core world, that kind of thing. It could be stationary, it could be small cells of operatives that don't really know each other. It doesn't have to be battles in space, but it can be. What kind of game does that one player want? Now, if you have one player, it does let you get into the kind of things that might be riskier in large group play, such as ace pilots. Right? So if you have a trusted NPC character like we were talking about as a wingman, and you've got 2 X-wing pilots, or even worse, A-wing pilots, being sent out on mission after mission, you might be able to get into a really interesting game where some of your sessions focus on preparing for the battle, dealing with the fear, the anxiety, the interpersonal relationships. Is everybody going to come back from this mission? You can build a pretty large but also kind of vague, rotating NPC fighter pilot cast, not all of whom come home at the end of the battle. And then deal with the battle itself and all the excitement and high action adventure, good guys versus bad guys, Star Wars stuff. And then after the battle, if the player survives, they come home. Right? And that could be a really interesting way to run the game and allow you to get deeper into the player's head or the character's head, than might be possible with a larger group. Force and Destiny, coming out later this year, gives us the morality mechanic. Force and Destiny, due to morality, is going to work quite differently. And while it may not be important yet because the game isn't out, this clip will still be out when the game is. So let's talk about it for a moment. Morality, rather than being an obligation, which is pulling the character into certain types of action, or duty, which I guess we could say is pushing them into certain types of situations. Morality is a way of representing that inner struggle between the opposed forces of light and dark. And players will be able to generate their characters with a strength and a weakness, an emotional strength and an emotional weakness, and need to be role-playing the interplay of these things. So, the situations that they get into are when their morality is triggered for a session. They are going to play on these emotional strengths and weaknesses. So, this is ideally suited for a small group, as is the whole concept of force users anyway, needing to hide out, or maybe being a mentor character and a learning character, or 2 characters who have found each other, both recognize they have these abilities and are discovering things together. The small group aspect of force use is something that we can easily get our head around. It's a little harder for Age of Rebellion when we're thinking about like combined military actions of some kind. All the scenes really of the Rebel Alliance in the movies are of lots of people running here and there. And Edge, of course, we can also get into the idea of this small group, because really at the beginning of the film we've got Han and Chewie, and to which is added another group of 2, and then another group of 2, and so on. So the games will lend themselves to a small player pool. Now the single player, this again, like we described with Age, would be the ideal way to focus on that inner turmoil caused by the morality mechanic. Are they taking the high road? Are they, demonstrating the qualities through which the light side of the force flows, or are they sinking down into their weakness and through that finding strength in the dark side? So that's where I would begin preparing a game for one player. As a quick recap then, we have look at the personality mechanics, obligation, duty, morality, filter that through a full galaxy, right? So that the world is engaging, that one player isn't spending all of their time in their own head and engaging with the dice and the game master's description. There are people to interact with, a trusted core of NPC allies, and then widening rings of, let's say, distrust as they meet other people in the galaxy. That's the starting point, which brings us next to motivation. While obligation, duty, and morality are important in the game, morality is the underpinning of the character's personality. It's what separates each character of a similar type from each other. Motivation is why they're doing what they're doing. So working with the player to develop a motivation which again gets them engaged in interacting would be my suggestion. Once these foundational aspects of the character are taken care of, it's time to look at the mechanical. Now, taking more obligation, taking less duty, these are ways to enhance the character. You can get credits for them, you can get gear, you can get XP. If you're having just the one character, this is something to seriously consider. How often will their duty or their obligation be triggered in play? If it's just them, how often will it be triggered? So knowing the right scale at which to balance these forces is important so that it comes up often enough to be interesting and that they have the tools that they need to get what they want to get done. In concert with that, there are a lot of synergies between the careers and specializations, which you may not get to see with just the focus being on one character. So this again goes to reinforce the idea that having an NPC, I'll use the word crew, might be something to consider very seriously, which brings me to the next suggestion, which has been around for a while, but never seems to be a terribly popular option. You might find it in Ars Magica, you'll find it in Wraith, you'll find it in some other games, and this idea is troop-style play, where the character takes on, or the player takes on, different characters. Now, the way this might work is in the Han and Chewie situation. The player might be Han. The game master takes on the regular role of Chewie, and they have their debates, their banter, and their friendship. And there are signals developed where the player knows when they're speaking to Chewie, and they're not speaking to the game master or the universe or any of these things. And establishing that trust is important. But then more characters join. Right? Now imagine in this case that Ben and Luke are purely NPC characters. They're going to be passing through Han's life is what's originally intended. The player takes Luke, let's say, and the game master takes on the role of Ben. So Chewie and Ben are purely NPCs from the classic definition of just game master characters. But the player is now playing two characters, right? Troop style play. There are some scenes where Luke goes off on his own. There are scenes where Luke learns about the Force, and there are scenes where Luke has to deal with these things pulling on him, guiding him toward joining the rebellion, the way that he deals with this struggle has an influence on Han. This is kind of interesting, and this is the sort of thing that can happen when you allow troop-style play in your game. It's difficult for Luke to have a conversation with Han, but there are a lot of other things going on which make this something to try. Now, in a game where you might have levels of status, I like to have the different status levels represented by another character. So in All for One Regime Diabolique, for example, each character starts out with what's called a lackey, right? Someone who takes care of their day-to-day business opportunities and makes sure their clothes are clean and there's food on the table and that sort of thing. So if I have two players, they're both playing musketeers, they're both playing lackeys. They're playing each other's lackeys so that there can be conversation across the two statuses, right? So in this case, we've got Han and his co-pilot Chewie, and then we have Luke and his mentor Ben. We can preserve those status differences and have those important conversations as two people. Whereas the conversations between Luke and Han, we don't have that distinction so much. So that's why I would make a recommendation like that. The last element I would consider is mobility, right? We've dealt with the things that are pushing and pulling the character. We've dealt with let's say the emotional or character foundation, the personality of the character. We've dealt with the fact that one character alone may not have the resources or the skills to handle everything that the Star Wars universe can throw at them. And so they need to be allied with people and willing to connect with other people. We've talked about the idea of troop-style play. The last thing is, how mobile are they going to be? Is this going to be a campaign focused on one location and all the struggles that are taking place there? Or is this going to be a planet-hopping campaign? So once mobility is addressed, if you're going to be stationary, then you can deal with vehicles, you can deal with beasts, and that sort of thing. It's quite easy to have small group transport. When you go with high mobility and just this small group, then piloting becomes an issue, right? What kind of space vehicle will the player have access to, and how large a crew is really needed to keep it going, right? Not only just keep it flying, but to keep it in repair, to defend it, and that sort of thing. Again, this is where the larger ships in Star Wars, like the Corellian freighters, they shine because they do have enough things to do for a full group of PCs. We can have people controlling the screens and people in the manning the guns, and we can have astrogator, we have a co-pilot, lots of things to do. Even repairs can be ongoing during combat. When you just have one or two or maybe three characters, your choices are influenced by the size of that group. So finding a cool ship that matches the size of your troop, if you go that way, or at least matches the size of your PC plus NPC group, is an important consideration. Outside of that, remember, it's Star Wars. It's cool. Everything is big. Everything is lived in and old. There are lots of things to explore. There are moral decisions. There's action. There's intrigue. There's a great deal of darkness and fear, which needs to be met by a great deal of bravery and light. Sounds like good fun. And with a single player, the characterization, the depth of exploration of the psychology of the character is laid open. You can spend all the time in the world putting them in situations that focus solely on that. Sounds like a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy your game. Thanks for the question, and thanks for watching.